figure it out later, I guess. I just reverted back to the old stuff. I think we're still live on. Huh. Okay, we're still live on Facebook too, or YouTube. Weird. All right. Whatever. Cool. All right. Can you see? Okay, you can still see me. Okay, good. Okay, good. Thank God. Okay, cool. So I hope you got pretty stoked, if you catch my drift, from that last simultaneous breath and squeeze. I know I did. So anyway, let's get into the topic. Okay, so I'm gonna post in the main areas of focus for today, and we're gonna go through this systematically, just kind of like an agenda. All right. Boom, boom. Okay. So this is the subject we're gonna talk about. So let's jump into it. First thing we're going to talk about is brain degeneration. What is brain degeneration? In the simplest way is that the functions that you expect to have show up for you when your brain is working, memory, language, spatial awareness. Where am I? Oh, I'm in my office. Oh, I'm sitting in front of a oh, I'm doing a live video on Facebook and YouTube to an incredible group of people from all across the world. And I have an agenda. That's like awareness of the moment, awareness spatially, presence, contextual awareness. That is not, people take that for granted. That is not something that is a guarantee. Okay? There was no contract. There was no contract when you were born that you signed that said, I will retain all of my cognitive faculties for my entire life. No such contract. We know that if you get into a car accident, if you have a traumatic brain injury, if you develop neurodegeneration like Alzheimer's or dementia, that we know that those functions can go away. I've seen it before, and it's the saddest thing to see in the world. Oops. Somebody's messaging me during a live. Don't do that. Don't do that. So you do not want to lose your cognitive abilities at any point. So what brain degeneration at the absolute simplest way is that you lose memory, you lose the ability to focus, to speak, to put together sentences, to recognize faces. You will forget the names of your mom. You'll forget the name of your son, your daughter, your wife, your husband, your friends, your family, anybody. That is what brain degeneration looks like in today's age, is that you will literally lose the most valuable asset that you have ever. And if you tuned in yesterday, you heard me talk a little bit more about this, which is, really there are things that you could be doing now to start mapping out different locations of your memory to prevent that from ever happening. And there are ways to absolutely prevent that. There are things that you could be doing right now to retain your faculties for the duration of your life. And this is a well-studied area. This is an area that I'm very involved in. This is actually where I got my start, was brain stimulation with ultrasound and treating depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, dementia, and traumatic brain injury. And I'm still involved in that. Actually, I had a call with one of the biggest minds in basically, a closed game caption button and thick thumbs. Yeah, no worries. That was you. Okay, good. That's fine. Please send me. I muted Facebook, so you can continue to send me messages now. So it shouldn't be an issue. Yeah. I mean, my history goes back to stimulating the brain to repair it, to clean it, to stimulate it, to facilitate the expansion of your consciousness. And I just had a call today with a researcher based out of the U.S. He's actually visiting an Oxford mathematician physicist at the UK in London right now today, and I caught him just at a perfect time to say, hey, how is the Alzheimer's research project going? And he's like, it's going good. Here's what we need to do next. We're passing papers back and forth, but it's literally a decades long project. So I definitely have authority to speak on this subject for sure. We've overseen hundreds and hundreds of clinical treatment cases in Alzheimer's and dementia. So, again, pay attention. If you know somebody, if you have a friend or a family member who has some kind of a neurodegeneration condition, this is the video for you. I'm going to lay out a couple of options for you and why these things happen. So anyway, everybody clear? Do you have a good sense of what brain degeneration? Are we on the same page? If we are, type a 2 in the chat. I just want to make sure at least I want to see if one person's along with me so far. 2 in the chat if you're like, okay, I think I understand what brain degeneration generally means. Okay, cool. We got a 2. Thank you, Christine. Good. And I'm sure more will come in, but I'll continue. So brain degeneration can be large. You can develop it from a traumatic brain injury. Thank you, Charlene, as well for the 2. There's lots of ways you can develop it. I mean, you could just neglect your brain and watch TikTok all day and drink alcohol and smoke, the wacky tobacco all day and drink and take drugs and all kinds of stuff. And I think you could experience brain degeneration, right? Nod your head. Yeah, if you agree. I'm like, yes, definitely. That's definitely possible, right? So, but, those are like, for the large part, like lifestyle-based results, right? If you smoke and you drink and you watch TikTok, don't come crying to me when you're like, man, it feels like I got a little bit dumber. I'm like, yeah, I could have told you that a long time ago, and there were things you could have done to prevent that. But the area we want to narrow down into is Alzheimer's and dementia. These are 2 that have genetic, environmental. Does not target people fairly. You could do everything right in your life. You could live a healthy life, a robust life, a smart life, whatever. But you can still develop Alzheimer's and dementia. So that, for right now, in my mind, should be a target area, right? Like, it's not like I'm not saying anything this to like be like, haha, this is like punishment for watching TikTok videos. Haha, we're not going to help you. That's not the case. But for cases of Alzheimer's and dementia, obviously they're very severely tied to a lot of people. It affects people across the board. So it's definitely the area that we're focusing on today. So let's look at the core between Alzheimer's and dementia, what it really means. So, and this relates to the next point, which is microtubules. Typically, Alzheimer's is believed to be due, I'll try to explain it in a simple way. Some of you may know extensive amounts of Alzheimer's lore and scientific methodology. This may be completely new to you. Either way, let this be a bookmark in your mind to maybe explore a little bit deeper through Googling. Go on a little Google adventure. What is Alzheimer's? The things you're going to want to look for are things called amyloid beta plaques. I'm going to type that in the chat here in Facebook. Amyloid beta plaques. Okay? So what an amyloid beta plaque, and the beta is spelt with like a Greek kind of B, so I can't type it out exactly here. But an amyloid beta plaque is a buildup of proteins that have misfolded in your brain, and they start whacking like bowling balls against bowling pins in your brain. And they start to develop like this cascade, this domino effect in Alzheimer's. In the model, the typical model of Alzheimer's is that amyloid beta plaques start to stick together and it's like Velcro. And this just happens because everybody's brain has amyloid beta plaques. You have them, I have them. But because our brain is able to clear them out at a regular basis, it doesn't become pathogenic. But in cases where it does, where your brain cannot clear amyloid beta plaques, then it starts to knock up against microtubules. And microtubules are these really long tubes in your brain that make up the entire structure of all your neurons. So when you start attacking the microtubules in your brain, that's where your memory is stored. So that's why the first things that tend to go in the Alzheimer's model is memory. Like, oh my God, I could have sworn I set my keys right here. I don't remember where they went. Where am I right now? It's like suddenly memory is gone. It's not like it got misplaced. It's like the actual structure of where the memory was located. Basically, if you want to think of the brain metaphorically, and now this, something that you should know about me is I don't believe that metaphors are great at anything, right? So metaphors are terrible for helping people understand things. They're just visual cues, okay? Because what I'm going to say is not accurate at all in terms of how things are structured, but maybe to help you understand it or visualize it a little bit better, think of a big forest, a huge, lush pine tree forest, and there's lots of trees, and you think of the trunk, and each trunk is a microtubule. Oh my gosh, I'm getting texts. Please forgive me for that. We're thinking about going to a concert this summer, and we're coordinating here on my live video. Please don't do that. So anyway, think of this big forest. You have the trunks of the trees. Those are those microtubules. You place certain memories in each tree. Now, what an amyloid beta plaque does in large quantities is as destructive as possible. It's like a lumberjack going there and taking a chainsaw and cutting down trees and ripping them out of your entire forest. So at the beginning stages, right, if you look at this huge lush forest and a couple trees disappear, you may not notice anything at first. But if that process just continues unabated, which it does in Alzheimer's and dementia, there will be a point where you wake up and you go, oh my God, I am literally missing huge chunks of my memory. And that's basically how Alzheimer's catches up to people suddenly. So if there's any early indication that you have any risk factor or anything like that, if you have any indications, you need to get tested. You need to go in and get this looked at for sure, because the age at which Alzheimer's and dementia and really neurodegeneration, even from traumatic brain injury, because traumatic brain injury is a big precursor for developing Alzheimer's. So if there's been a whiplash injury, a head injury, something that could have jostled your brain, doesn't even have to have left a mark. I mean, falling off of a bicycle and hitting your head, even with a helmet on, could be enough to create the conditions for neurodegeneration. And of course, there's things like lifestyle, environment, like are you living in a house with mold or heavy metals or sound pollution or bad air or bad water, or you have a couple of habits like smoking or drinking that are separate from that, but those are environmental lifestyle risk factors that, combined with a previous traumatic brain injury, can really add up into something not good. So I just want to ask people watching, do you know anybody, anybody in your entire life, out of all of our collective lives, who here knows of somebody close to you, like a close family friend or a friend or another family member in your area, even in your city or in your life that you've met, who's been touched by Alzheimer's or dementia? Just put a 3 in the chat. It doesn't have to, it could be any connection to it. Like, do you have a reference point for what that looks like, right? So type a 3 in the chat if you have some reference to, like, I've seen somebody or I've heard the stories from like real close trusted people about what Alzheimer's, dementia actually looks like, how it progresses to some degree. Right. So Charlene, it's touched you in some way. I'm going to put a 3 in the chat too. It touched one of my colleagues in the ultrasound field. His own grandfather had it, and we were visiting. He was visiting San Francisco many years ago. Many years ago. Must have been 2016 or something like that. 2015. And I got to see the grandfather in person, and there's something that's gone from a person, right? It's a living person, and it's like a huge chunk of their, what I imagine to have probably been in the past, a very probably extremely funny, charismatic, loving, compassionate, intelligent person. I mean, given his grandson, the kid's a genius. His grandfather must have been also equally highly intelligent, but this reduced him down to I don't know, what I imagine a 4-year-old would do. Just sitting there like, oh, like this. Like the guy was 76 years old, and this is just pretty far gone. And I get messages now from people too. Now they say like, hey, like I have a friend or I have a sister or I have a mom. They've got full blown Alzheimer's and they are like, they cannot be left alone. And so it does get severe. So I see, yes, Christine, Beth as well, that you've all been touched in some way, unfortunately, by the specter of these forms of brain degeneration. So they're very serious. So I've already spoken a little bit about there's the standard model of Alzheimer's looks at Alzheimer's as a function of the buildup of amyloid beta plaques. And those start to create big balls of amyloid beta plaques that can't be cleared or pulled out of your brain by your lymphatic cleaning system. And then those start to rub up against microtubules, thus destroying them, literally destroying them completely. And then you lose memory, and then it's just like boom, 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 boom. And it gets to a certain point where it's just a wildfire. You can go from still able to remember people's faces to 18 months later, you're drooling and you can't eat food because you don't even remember how to eat it. And then once it gets to the worst, it's, I forgot how to swallow. So you aspirate food and you die that way. Or you literally, your brain, I mean, think of how fundamental is it for your brain to remember how to breathe? And imagine that the memory that like, do this, do this, do this. Like we started this video with a simultaneous squeeze. Imagine if I was like, okay, take a deep breath in, and you're like, I don't know how. I forgot how to breathe and I'm suffocating right now. But there's no problem. There's no physical problem technically. There's like a neurological issue. So it's pretty scary, and it'll get you fast. So anyway, if that way, I don't know. I'm not trying to scare people here, but just trying to really explain it. So the model typically around amyloid beta plaques is that those need to be cleared out of the brain in order to give the brain space to exist. A newer model that's still compatible with the old model, but a little bit more advanced, is this whole idea that those microtubules themselves are where consciousness itself exists in your brain. And this is a theory postulated that I think is absolutely fascinating by Dr. Stuart Hameroff, who actually happens to be a good friend of mine, an advisor for probably 15 years or something now. He's the one who's over in the UK meeting with a physicist, a collaborator of his, Roger Penrose, an Oxford physicist, also named he's knighted, Sir Roger Penrose at Oxford. So my advisor is meeting with him over in the UK right now. So his model of Alzheimer's would have to do with microtubules alone, regardless of the amyloid beta plaques, because it's not exactly clear that amyloid buildup definitely causes Alzheimer's. There are people who have huge amyloid beta plaques growing in their brain and they don't have Alzheimer's at all. So there actually are a number of exceptions to that model. But the one thing that you look at when you see clear-cut Alzheimer's is that the microtubules themselves are completely eradicated substantially. And there are models of Alzheimer's that show people with no amyloid beta plaque present, but microtubule destruction. That looks like Alzheimer's full on. And then you see people with like tons of amyloid beta and destroyed microtubules. That's also Alzheimer's and dementia. So his hypothesis, his proposition is more that it's your microtubules themselves that must be protected. How do you protect microtubules? Well, it's a very complex area for sure. But just so you know that if you hear people referring to beta amyloid plaque buildup as the end all be all of Alzheimer's, that's actually not valid anymore. And there was actually a number of very fraudulent studies that were published over the last 10 years because money that faked data to show that amyloid beta plaque was like the number one cause of Alzheimer's. And they went back and they looked at the data again and they said, no, this was fake. And they did it because there was billions of dollars at stake to, again, this is a big problem. There could be a lot of money in fixing. Thank you, Christine. That's a good, I love that comment, by the way. So basically, Um, amyloid beta plaque model, that model that's been around for 10 years, is crumbling like the way Alzheimer's would crumble your brain. So what kind of the only thing that really sits in its place that's still a commonality that still does have a correlation is microtubules. So why are microtubules also important here? Well, if you think of, again, this is I'm going off of for me personally, I have personally looked at microtubules extensively for the last probably 15 years. So microtubules for me make a lot of sense. But for you, it might not make a lot of sense. You're like, what is a microtubule, etc. One thing I think would be really cool with Facebook would be if I could like put a GIF in the chat with a picture of a microtubule or something like that. But I literally do not know how to do that. And I don't think it is possible, unfortunately. But I would so love to do that. It would be very cool. Because I would be posting pictures of this. But later on, you can go look at, a microtubule and that kind of stuff. I'll write how it's posted here. Microtubule. Just like that, okay? So how do you protect microtubules? How would you do something with microtubules? Well, that same guy, that Stuart Hameroff, is a researcher and a professor and an investigator of microtubules and the ability for ultrasound to facilitate the activation of microtubules, the stability of microtubules, the growth of them, then the proliferation through ultrasound. And so he's an advisor of mine, may give you an indication into how I got here in the first place. If you look at the vagus nerve, it's this extremely long axon grouping of tons of neurofilaments. Each of those neurofilaments contains an extreme grouping of microtubules. So when you see things, to the point of Christine here, she did say, I'd honestly bet money that the vagus is actually the root of it. I was terrified when this all first started because it felt like dementia. That's exactly what we're going to be kind of exploring here. Now, I will preface this by saying, I am not here to convince you of anything. Don't take my word for any of this. I am not like an all-seeing, all-knowing person. I'm as fallible as anybody else. So please fact check me and don't take my word on any of this stuff. And I would prefer that because if you look into this, you might be like, holy cow, this is really fascinating stuff. And it really is. And, maybe later I'll post some videos. I don't want to promise anything. But just look up, here, I'll type his name in here. Stuart Hameroff. Actually, I think there's a Facebook group called the Stuart Hameroff. Yeah, there we go. There is a Facebook group called the Stuart Hameroff Appreciation Society. That's him with his gray goatee and his bald head. He's a great guy. You can go request to join that group. I know the admin. Her name's Joy. Fantastic group. That's a place to go learn about microtubules for sure. So please head over there and give them some traffic if you're legitimately interested in, just exploring more of these topics, okay? So the vagus nerve could be, to the point of Christine too, you kind of beat me to the punch here a little bit. It's not exactly what I'm claiming here, but that there is a connection between the health of your vagus nerve and the health of your memory. And this is something that I explore in a lot of my work, which is that typically speaking, and even Charlene can speak to this too. Many of my clients can speak to this. Many of my clients who do ultrasound vagus nerve stimulation too, by the way. I speak from like real experience of doing this stuff. Many of my clients do report that when they stimulate their vagus nerve properly with ultrasound, according to our specific protocol, I can't vouch for any other usage of ultrasound. I can only vouch for the specific, 10-year developed protocol that we use in our program, that they do experience an increase in their memory, an increase in their ability to focus, an increase in their, not to sound too woo, but their somatic embodied feeling. Like they feel like, oh my God, I'm back, right? Which is the exact direction you want to be going. think about the opposite of that, right? So if we can get people to have more memory, better focus, more brain function, better sleep, better dreams, and let's say that was on one end of the spectrum or moving in that direction, because like we know that there can be people with an extreme degree of all those abilities. There are people who are mega 210 IQ individuals. So it's not like there's an end to how far that can go. And I would argue that some of those folks probably have really well-developed vagus nerves and really well-developed brains, probably. So the further you go down that line, you get higher intelligence, higher, like better memory, better visual recall, everything. Everything improves in that direction. A lot improves when you go in that direction. When you go in the opposite direction, though, and you start to lose memory, lose focus, lose attention, lose sleep, more diffuse, less in your body, more in your head, more like this, you're going in the direction of what Alzheimer's looks like, exactly. So when you stimulate the vagus nerve, you take someone who is not at Alzheimer's level, but people who are experiencing, like Christine says, some of the symptoms, some of those like, wow, this is oddly like dementia, and you shift them away from that. It's like you're moving in the exact opposite direction of Alzheimer's and dementia. And when you aren't doing those things, when the vagus nerve does get damaged, which it does, and we've talked about that all the time. How does the vagus nerve get damaged? Drinking alcohol, which is a lifestyle factor that leads to Alzheimer's, smoking a bunch of bad stuff, drug usage. All of those things can put you in that bad direction towards neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's like symptoms. Anything that you do to turn off the vagus nerve will induce symptoms of Alzheimer's. If you don't believe me, you could go and be a little scientist here. Not to belittle, I'm not trying to use little in a negative way. I think if you become a citizen scientist and you go and test this, you could have some pretty big insight here. So, disclaimer, I am not advising you to go out at all and purchase Benadryl, diphenhydramine HCl. I'm not advising you to do that. And I'm certainly not advising you to take 50 milligrams of pink Benadryl pills and noticing what that does to your brain, your memory, your consciousness, once it kicks in, right? Guess what? I spoke to the head many years ago, a chief neuroscientist at the head of a dementia clinic here in the US. And he had so many patients coming in reporting in their 40s and their 50s early signs of early onset dementia. They said, "Doc, I am literally losing my memory. I feel terrible. I'm having like nightmares verging on flying into oblivion. I'm misplacing things. I have brain fog. I wake up in a funk. I think I'm getting dementia." That's what they would say. And the doctor would say, "Well, what are the medications you're taking? Like this, let's take this seriously. What are you taking?" And they say, I'm taking an SSRI, or I don't take any medications." Hey, TK, good to see you. Welcome. That they're taking a bunch of medications, but they would consistently say, "One thing I'm taking to help me go to sleep is Benadryl, diphenhydramine HCl, between 25 to 50 milligrams, that they're taking it before bed so consistently that they are checking themselves into dementia clinics." Now I'm going to get to the point here. I'm going to get to the big grand reveal of what is diphenhydramine doing to your vagus nerve. Give me a second. That he said, "My advice for you would be to stop taking the Benadryl before bed," and all of those symptoms magically cleared away. And they're like, "Oh my God, I have my memory back. Oh my God, wow, weird. What was going on?" I wish we had more people watching this, by the way, because this is fucking big stuff. I don't know if you guys realize that. Just going to toot my own darn horn here, but this is big stuff, okay? So guess guess what diphenhydramine is classified as from a pharmacological perspective? Diphenhydramine is considered to be an anticholinergic medication. What is the main neurotransmitter system of your parasympathetic vagus nerve system and of your memory? It's a cholinergic system. So when you take an anticholinergic, which shuts down your cholinergic system, including your vagus nerve, you start to develop symptoms of dementia. Okay? I mean, am I crazy here in being like, well, could there be a connection between the two? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And I'm not the only person on the planet who has made that obvious connection. So, what do we like? That's like bomb dropping, like boom, big revelation. So I appreciate you all for being here on this one. This is like, I'm excited about this video because this is cool. And I know that, really all it takes to change the world is a few people. I don't need 1 million people watching these videos. I've never needed 1 million people to grow this group to 23,000 people. Literally don't care about the size. I care about honestly, it's the quality of people. And I'm glad that you're here because you can handle a conversation that's 30 minutes in depth where you're following a train of thought, right? Most people out there right now, and thank you, TK, absolutely, it is huge. I agree with you, is most people are scrolling and doing this through their Facebook shorts and their TikTok vids and their algorithm shit. They're not, people are losing the ability to sustain focus. And it's really a big problem. But I don't need them. I need you because we're doing some big stuff. So, all right. So Benadryl, anticholinergic. The vagus nerve is a cholinergic system. When you shut off the vagus nerve, you develop dementia-like symptoms. So could there be a connection between the vagus nerve and dementia? Yeah, absolutely. There are tons of connections, but I won't go into that. But we'll just say, okay, for now, and I would say fact check me, please go do your research. And I'm not telling you, please don't experiment with this. Just take my word for it on this one, that you don't need to go start a Benadryl habit to go in, is he right about that? I need to find out for myself, right? If I told you heroin was addictive, would you be like, I need to go really figure that out for myself? I wouldn't recommend it. So just take my word for it. Benadryl causes dementia-like symptoms by, in large part, shutting down main functions of the vagus nerve. So moving on, in my experience with vagus nerve specific stimulation, which my whole life has not been about the vagus nerve. My whole life, I don't know, what is my whole life about? What do you guys think? What is my whole life about? I don't know. I don't think that way. If I ask myself the question, what is my whole life about? My whole life, if I'm being honestly, I describe myself to a fellow CEO of another ultrasound company. I was like, well, what are you doing? I mean, what kind of work are you doing right now? And I was like, dude, I'm a merc. I'm a mercenary. If there's an actual need out there that's a painful pain point for people and they're willing to invest in the solution, I will be there. And if it's ultrasound, then I'll be there. So what is my life about? I don't know. If there's enough people who need help with Alzheimer's, then we're, ready to pounce on it. So, but in large part, my life in the last 10 years has been neural stimulation to modulate circuits in the brain. My reason, it's funny because some people describe me. I had a friend who recently I visited in Seattle, who I haven't seen for a couple of years. The last time I saw him was in 2019 in Hong Kong, in his office in the Polytechnic University. He's a great guy, really smart guy. And I haven't seen him for years. He's like, I'm in Seattle. I was like, I'm gonna drive right there, and I'm gonna meet up with you. Like, let's hang out. And he was describing me to some of the other guests, and he said, Sterling got into this whole ultrasound stimulation thing of the brain because, it's really sad. His sister committed suicide from depression, and so he really dove into how do you prevent people from ever experiencing that again. And he's not entirely wrong, but that's not entirely accurate. And the truth is that I was working on ultrasound when my sister was alive, before I even knew she had depression. I was working on ultrasound for years prior to that. It's a better, is it a better story? Is it a simpler narrative to tell people that, yeah, I did lose my sister, and it is now, probably makes up 95% of like, fuck, yeah, am I going to wake up and show up for this job? Yes, absolutely. But if I really think about it, what really happened was a year prior to any of that happening, I read Stuart Hameroff's paper on, he was stimulating people's brains with ultrasound. This is prior to my sister was completely alive at the time when I got into ultrasound. I didn't dive into ultrasound because my sister committed suicide. I was already fully in it and actually had funding and everything. So, there's a simpler narrative here, but in truth, I was inspired by Stuart Hameroff, who you can go to his I would recommend you go join his Facebook group, give him some love, man. Like honestly, guys, if Stuart Hameroff wasn't around, I wouldn't be doing this video for sure. There's no chance about it. So I owe a lot to him. That's really the reason that I got into this. But, his paper was microtubules are responsive to ultrasound waves. And if we send ultrasound over microtubules, any cluster of microtubules, his main target was the brain. I figured out in 2016 and 2017 that if you applied that same ultrasound we've been developing, but to the vagus nerve, that the vagus nerve is massively packed with huge strands of microtubules, and they're just as responsive here in the neck and here in the body as they are in the brain. And oftentimes it's a lot more simpler because, the brain is pretty packed with different functions. So if you're trying to drive ultrasound right into the brain, it's like you have to be like highly specialized, like a little laser beam to try and trigger like the right network and not trigger the next network. But when it comes to the vagus nerve in the neck, it's only one cholinergic network you're going to hit. There are other nerves, but there are ways you can easily control focus of ultrasound to the vagus nerve. It's a lot easier to do neural stimulation with ultrasound to the vagus nerve than it is to the brain. Absolutely. So Stuart Hameroff, that's why I got into it. My sister, I love her to death, literally and figuratively. She is gone, and that was sad. But the whole reason I was like, this guy Hameroff, who I already knew from I had been studying him for 5 years in college before I ever met him, before he ever published that paper, I was obsessed with the microtubule thing. And he's like, what if we stimulated him with ultrasound? Could we elicit an effect? And guess what that paper showed? That stimulation of the right temporal window with ultrasound right through the temporal window, through the skull. Good. Awesome. Christine, he'll love that. I've been for years trying to get him more on social media. He is a hardcore academic. This guy is a smart dude for sure. If he's meeting with a Sir Roger Penrose, the physicist in Oxford, like as we speak right now, probably having like some nice dinner in some fancy ass restaurant. Yeah, he's a smart dude. He'll appreciate it for sure. So what he showed was that the effects of ultrasound right to the brain are conscious enhancing, that they make you feel like, like more aware. You feel like, oh my gosh, how do you describe this? That your consciousness, your conscious space balloon expanded even slightly from 2 minutes of ultrasound going like that right through your window, right through your temporal window into your brain. I was like, that's fascinating. This is back in, 2012, 2013. By the way, my sister was still well and alive at the time. And I said, okay. And I actually, fortunately for me, how all things are like connected, or how does this all work? Before, it's so weird and funny because when I was 18, I started doing ultrasound work when I was 21 and 22 when I was taking classes at UC Berkeley in California. But when I was 18, on my own completely for a completely separate project, I was developing circuits with parts that I bought at Radio Shack to do ultrasound pulses through water to split water and hydrogen to create a special, highly flammable explosive gas called hydroxy gas. Yeah, go Bears. Heck yeah. Go Bears. I love Cal. I love that school so much. I love Berkeley too, by the way. Freaking amazing. It's hard to consider moving back there these days though, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, when I was 18, before I ever got into any of this neural stimulation stuff, had already had hands-on engineering experience with building ultrasound systems. And ever since I was a kid, I was always doing electronics work. I have a software engineering background, a hardware electronics engineering background. I have college experience in engineering. So it's all funny how this stuff kind of unfolds. But essentially, Stuart Hameroff paved the way for stimulating microtubules with ultrasound through the brain, through the temporal window. That is a field that continues to exist today, and I have colleagues who are like rocking it right now. One of them has again, his grandfather also is the same guy who has the Alzheimer's problem. And in my case, in 2016, 2017, experimented a little bit. I went a little bit outside of the normal realm of what if we tried it on the vagus nerve? And we actually tried it on the ear. We actually did ultrasound on the auricular branch of the vagus nerve that goes in your ear before we did it on the neck. Isn't that funny? And nowadays everybody's going to electrical stimulation to the ear. I was in 2016, 2017 already stimulating the auricular branch of the vagus nerve all the way back then. So if you guys think I'm like new to this game in 2023, no, I'm not. I've been at this for nearly 12 years, okay? That's got to be worth something. I mean, come on, whatever. So vagus nerve stimulation, clearly there's a connection between disabling the vagal nerve, developing symptoms of dementia, developing symptoms of Alzheimer. Yeah, definitely a good call for sure, Christine. And I believe we have a call coming up too, so we'll get into it. I promise you that. I know you mentioned in your comment, like, I hope you'll give me some practical advice. I'm like, 100%. I wouldn't waste your time with a call if I didn't think I could, and based on your intake form, 100%. I'm sure there's something that we can do. So vagus nerve stimulation. Now so I don't want us to drill too far into just ultrasound vagus nerve stimulation. I want to be fair. I want to be a little bit fair here and tell you that, vagus nerve stimulation isn't only done with ultrasound. Most of you watching are like, huh? Ultrasound on my vagus nerve? What? Well, actually, no. I know most of you are actually clients of mine, so you're like, well, yeah, duh. Of course, we do ultrasound on our vagus nerve every day. But for those who are like maybe new to this or watching the replay or whatever, you're like, I thought it was like almost all electrical stimulation of the vagus nerve. And I'm like, well, yeah, most of it is. Actually, it's funny. I'm so blessed because, my history is like ultrasound, and I get to talk about this with people who are like, yeah, I totally know what you're talking about. It's awesome, right? Amen to that. Four in the chat if you know what I'm talking about. 4 in the chat if you know what I'm talking about for my clients. So vagus nerve stimulation in general can be done electrically in the ear, in the neck. You can get an implant. You can do it on your spleen. And then there's like light stimulation. There is ultrasound. There's vibration. There's breathing. There are a lot of ways to stimulate your vagus nerve, for sure. Okay? So in any situation, thank you. Good. Yes, TK, Charlene, good. Yeah. So there are lots of ways to stimulate your vagus nerve. It doesn't have, I'm not saying it has to be one way. It's not my way or the highway or anything like that. If you have any symptoms of anything like any kind of brain degeneration, Alzheimer's, dementia, anything like I've mentioned that you're like, oh, I am concerned, my memory, my brain fog, my sleep, my insomnia, my just general aloofness, just not feeling good, is that, yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I kind of like with clay. I'm like, okay, well, let's shoot you this way. Let's do the right things to kind of like get you in that direction. I want to get you more on the 200 IQ. I'm saying IQ, 200 IQ. I want to put you in that direction more and bring you away from the 50 IQ zone, right? Because Alzheimer's, dementia. If I ran an IQ on someone who was, what would their IQ be? 20. They wouldn't be like, what's this? What are these boxes? I don't know what these numbers are, right? So we want to move you away from that and more towards your brain being really smart and good and awesome. So vagus nerve stimulation, I believe that the vagus nerve is the switch or the button to start pressing, eliciting, to move you in the direction away from the bad stuff. Which is the content of this video, is brain degeneration. Okay. So vagus nerve stimulation. I did my due diligence, my fairness quota, to say that there are all types of vagus nerve stimulation that can be done. Now let's get to the real meat and potatoes. Ultrasound. If you are going to select out of any of the options available to you, which I have tried all of them, I absolutely have. Well, I have never gotten an implant in my body to stimulate my vagus nerve. So I still can't officially say for certain that ultrasound is better than an implanted electrical stimulation. Just to be fair. But given the pros and the cons, most ultrasounds today require no surgery. None. Whereas an implanted VNS does require surgery. And I will add that I do have a number of clients. Now, this could get me in trouble, okay? So I'm almost afraid to say this, but I'll try to say it in a okay way. I'm gonna, you know what? Do you guys believe in channeling? Have you ever heard of mediums? People who channel spirits into their head. I think I have a funny idea. Okay, so we know channeling. So Christina's a clear channel. Great. I am a clear channel too. And I have a channel on the other side. His name's Bob. And I'm gonna when my head goes like that, I'm gonna channel Bob, and he's gonna speak through me of some experiences that Bob has had and not me personally. Not Sterling. This is not gonna be Sterling talking. This is gonna be Bob. I'm gonna channel Bob, okay? So here we go. Hi, I'm Bob, okay? So as Bob, there are a few clients that we do work with who have epilepsy, like actual full-on diagnosed epilepsy where they have a seizure 7 times a day. And they have considered, a lot of them have become very close to considering getting the implant because it seems to be the vagus nerve stimulator implant, the electrical one, implanted in their neck, that seems to be the only potential future option for them in most cases to reduce the seizure intensity. They're also on a lot of drugs that are really, epilepsy drugs suck. I'm still speaking as Bob, by the way. They have heard of me, and they've known that, well, they know of Bob. Bob is able to do ultrasound of the vagus nerve, and that it can, in a lot of cases, be as effective, if not maybe more effective and less side effect prone, than implanted VNS. And so that Bob has worked personally with them as clients with ultrasound VNS. I'm still speaking as Bob. and that their seizure intensity and amount has reduced significantly after only, in the 6 to 8 week range, which is actually different than a VNS implant. VNS implants typically take somewhere between 4 to 6 months to see those kinds of reductions. I believe, and I'm still talking as Bob, I believe that based on Bob's experience, is that you could potentially say that ultrasound VNS can, in some cases, maybe be more effective than an implanted VNS device. Okay? So, I think that's all that Bob needs to say. So Bob is gonna give it back to Sterling. Okay, Sterling's back. Wow, I was completely blacked out for all of that. I have no idea what Bob just said. Crazy. Woo-hoo. Woo-hoo. Did I just black out for a second? I have no idea where the last 2 minutes went. I don't know anything that just happened. So anyway, but yeah, I've noticed some things with the technology and these things, and I think that there's some good options out there for people exploring, vagus nerve stimulation. As non-Bob, but as Sterling, I would say that I personally, given the option of stimulating, I would personally not choose any of the electrical devices that are out there. There are like $200 to $300 to $400, $500, $3,000 electrical devices that are not implanted. And those may seem appealing and applicable or alluring in some way, but there are a lot of downsides. And I don't want to make this video about like the pros and cons of electricity versus ultrasound. That's probably for another video, honestly. I think, if you join me tomorrow and we can talk about that, or sometime later, I don't know. I just basically choose the topic of today's video on the 5 o'clock videos like that we're doing right now, just the day of. It's based on whatever is relevant to most people as they ask in the Facebook group. So that's it. So you guys can literally generate the content of my videos depending on what you post or ask or talk about. And oftentimes the videos will be based on client calls that I have that day, where, I'm not talking about clients specifically, but if I'm hitting on subjects with multiple clients throughout the day, I'll probably address that in the live video. So that's also another way I use this. But so anyway, we've exhausted the full scope of what I promised to talk about: brain degeneration, Alzheimer's, dementia, microtubules, vagus nerve stimulation, and ultrasound. So for the most part, I feel like I've hopefully delivered. If you're watching, you caught some pretty intense revelations about the nature of neurodegeneration and how much the vagus nerve actually really is involved. And like I said, my encouragement for you guys, if you're just tuning in or whatever, is if you want to learn more kind of about the nature of what we're talking about today, is to join the Stuart Hameroff Appreciation Society. I don't often recommend people join other Facebook groups. If anything, you know me as I will almost never, ever recommend another Facebook group. This is probably the very first time I've ever done this. But I think you might get something out of that group in particular. That's a very cool group to join, and a good friend of mine too. So please do that. Make a request. So good. All right. So if so far you've enjoyed today's conversation and you appreciate it, put a 5 in the chat. If today you learned something, you can do 2 things, one of 2 things, or 3 things. If you learned something that you feel like, okay, that was definitely interesting and worth it, put a 5 in the chat. 5 in the chat if today you're like, okay, I feel like I'm coming away with something kind of valuable, I'm really appreciative of, and, was it, does the smoke match the fire? I don't know. Did I put in too much energy into this? Did I oversell it? I don't know. I all I can do is just show up for it. But and then if there's anything particular that you learned, what was one thing from today's video that you're like, okay, that in particular got my attention. I would love to know. Thank you, Christine. So we got a 5 from Christine. I would love to know what one interesting tidbit you've learned from today was, if you could, just so I can get some feedback. Like, what out of all that I talked about was like something that you're like, ooh, bing, ding, ding, ding for you. That helps me a lot to go like, okay, these are areas that click for people. Like, these are subjects worth returning to. I like, legitimately, I want that feedback because I want to make these videos really worthwhile. I want to make these videos like worth our time together, worth my time, worth your time, and everything. So if there's any one subject that you're like, boom, that's good, share that. Okay, cool. So Charlene, the tubular stuff, awesome. The Tubular Bells, if you guys know that, is that an album from like the 80s or something like that? Which is an awesome album, by the way. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, so microtubules from Beth. Good. So yeah, if you like the microtubule stuff, the Stuart Hameroff Appreciation Society is chock full of every talk that Stuart Hameroff has ever given on microtubules. And like I said, the whole reason I ever got into ultrasound, the whole reason I'm here, even being able to talk about the vagus nerve and ultrasound and this, is due to the work of Stuart Hameroff on microtubules. That was my main original interest in the first place. I remember, maybe this is more of a young adolescent boy activity, but when I was a little boy, when I was in my early teenage years, like, I don't know, middle school, high school, I wasn't allowed to listen to music at night. So I snuck a little Walkman, a Sony Walkman with AM radio on it, like an AM FM radio. And I would sneak into my bed and I would listen to this channel called Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. And he would, this channel would talk about the craziest stuff, like extraterrestrials and Anunnaki and Planet X and Nibiru and just, holy cow, a lot of crazy stuff. So I was a weird kid, I guess. It's true. I was a nerd. I'm not going to deny it. I don't know how much, I don't think that's changed very much, but I'm a cooler nerd. I'm a more socialized nerd. You used to, well, there you go, Christine. We're like kindred spirits. Like, I already knew that from before you even said that. I was thinking of you probably like, I bet she's listening to that too. But yeah, so Coast to Coast, Stuart Hameroff was on that when I was like 13 years old. And I listened to that particular episode, and he was talking about microtubules in the brain being the localized source unit of consciousness, and how inside of those microtubules, there are these little quantum channels that are like little quantum carbon rings, and that they resonate inside of it, and they're so deep and hidden that they have the ability to have quantum superposition. So, typically when we talk about think of a computer has information stored on it in ones and zeros, right? So if you think of like a file on your computer on a little thumb drive, it's just a bunch of ones and zeros, 1 1 0 0 0 0 1. That's called binary. But in the scientific field of quantum computing, they talk about this idea or this possibility that you could have a one and a zero in the same place at the same time, and it would have basically, instead of binary being a 0 and a 1, it would be a 0, a 1, or a 1 0 at the same time, a superposition of both. And that if you could get that, you could take what would normally be a linear computation and create this almost exponential growth by just stacking multiple quantum units. Quantum would be exponentially greater information capability of processing information than just simple 1 0 1 0. And so, dude, I was like 13. I was like, so you're telling me that my brain is a potentially advanced quantum computer, and that through that ability to quantumly experience my environment, that this could give rise to the discoveries of like consciousness itself, and that if we could unlock and untap the brain outside of the model of neuroscience, which sees our brain, neuroscience sees our brain as this simple one on and off neuron. You literally, neuroscience today is so basic. It's not much better than what they first originated in like the 1950s and the 60s, when they first discovered the simple transistor, which could turn a light on and off. And then they looked at neurons and they said, oh, a neuron, it's either an on neuron or an off neuron. It's not that at all. One single neuron contains thousands of microtubules and displays extremely complex behavior. So Stuart Hameroff, with his one theory of this, and with tons of evidence, a very robust theory that he co-wrote with Sir Roger Penrose, who's he's visiting in the UK right now. I was at Starbucks getting their new olive oil Aliato drink, and I was like sipping on it. I was like, I'm gonna call Stuart. Called him, and I was like, hey, are you back yet? He's like, oh, I'm still in the UK. I'm meeting with Penrose right now. Yeah. So anyway, Stuart Hameroff has completely challenged the traditional model that your brain is this like 1 and 0 sequencing computer. And Stuart Hameroff's like, no, your brain is like one neuron contains 1,000 microtubules, and each microtubule contains tens of thousands of little tiny quantum like little switches like that. Like, he just exploded it. And they were, you know what? They were so angry at him because they're like, Stuart, shut the hell up. You're making us look bad. So he has been almost a thorn in the side of these old school neuroscientists for years, but he's not wrong at all. They have to begrudgingly be like, okay, well, clearly a neuron isn't just the simple 1 and 0 kind of thing, right? So that's why I got into all this stuff, was because I was listening to the freaking radio, and Stuart Hameroff was on this freaking AM radio thing. He's not a kooky guy. He's an academic. He's an anesthesiologist. He's written in like the biggest journals of anesthesiology. He's well known around the world. This guy is world famous. He just hosted the Science of Consciousness event in Italy just last week, with thousands of people in attendance from all over the world, from every discipline. The guy's not a kook. The guy's like a legit dude. And he's the guy who was like, hey, what if we stimulated those microtubules with ultrasound? So when I was 13, I heard that. I was obsessed with microtubules. When I was 18, independent, Stuart hadn't even talked ultrasound at that time. I was like, I'm going to do ultrasound because ultrasound has the ability to do interesting things to water. For chemistry, actually. I was doing sonochemistry with ultrasound more than anything. And building systems myself. And then when I went to college down in Berkeley, literally, I thought I had this idea. I thought to myself in 2012, 2013, I said, what's Stuart Hameroff up to? I hadn't thought about him for like a year. I said, what's Stuart Hameroff up to? And I went and Googled it. I went, Stuart Hameroff, enter. And he had just, like 30 days prior to me doing that, had just published in like Nature journals a study that showed that stimulating the human brain with ultrasound induces changes in consciousness. And that was when I knew the merging had happened. That was in 2013. My sister was very much still alive and very beautiful and amazing, and I love her and I miss her. And I didn't do any of this because I was super sad about my sister dying, which I was when she died. But I was already well into this before that. So anyway, just to correct the record, not like it's a bad thing. It's a simplified narrative. But the truth is that microtubules are like the biggest, grandest insight. You can tell by the nature of this call even that just this tiniest little thing can unpack so much insight. It's like Einstein was able to split the atom and create the atomic bomb, for better or worse, right? Regardless. But if you split that microtubule, what do you crack open? You crack open the secrets of consciousness, like human consciousness, which is what gets lost when you develop Alzheimer's and dementia. Your microtubules fall apart, and that's what Alzheimer's and dementia is. You lose that base unit, that Lego building block, the IKEA modules of consciousness in Alzheimer's, and it's the microtubule. So anyway, awesome. Super cool. But yeah, so I want to look at some of the comments. Yeah, absolutely. So microtubules are awesome. The confirmation concerning the connections of the vagus nerve to Alzheimer's, I want to learn more. Good. So thank you for that feedback on biggest takeaway for today. Absolutely happy. We'll definitely talk more for sure. Yeah, you listen to that too. Love that show. I don't listen to it anymore, but I used to live it. It was like every night, like clockwork. I'd be like, okay, we're going to 1440 a.m. George Norrie. I'm going to listen to the full 3-hour thing. I was like, screw you, Mom. I'm not going to sleep. And I was like, I hated waking up in the morning because I was up till 1 or 2 in the morning listening to this dang show. So anyway, Beth wrote, I wonder if there might be any studies of VNS repairing brain lesions, minor from Lyme spirochetes passing the brain barrier. That sucks. Maybe, let's talk, on our next call. I know we have a call coming up soon. Let's explore that. Definitely. Let's dig into it a little bit deeper. For sure. I find the connection fascinating. I wrote about this, about how our brains are incredibly powerful computers. And after my activation, I know what we're capable of. Good. So you know what's up, right? So I'm looking forward to, brain connecting with you. I've been told I have interesting conversations. I'm like, thank you. I'm flattered, but whatever, just time and place and the people who listen. So otherwise I'd be literally a crazy person talking into a room. So thank God I have a Facebook group for this. Awesome. Well, cool. So that's going to wrap it up. I'm going to wrap up the live stream on YouTube. Thank you guys for watching on the replay, and we'll see you later. All right. So Facebook folks,